welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's career education session on careers in higher ed. I'm Dr. Christine Kelly, the Associate Director of the PHutures Career Hub at Johns Hopkins University. And today I'm really delighted to be joined by Dr. Shawntay Stocks, Assistant Director, Fellowships and Community Engagement here at Johns Hopkins. Today's session marks a second installment of a new series, Discovering the Humanities Through the Professions, aimed at introducing participants with advanced training in humanities and humanistic social science fields to a wide range of highly compelling, impactful professional careers, alongside strategies to leverage their degrees into these careers and their associated workplace environments. Before we begin, I just want to express my gratitude to all of you who've taken time to join us today, and my huge gratitude to our session facilitator, Dr. Stocks, for taking time from her busy schedule to join us and to lead today's session. Let's take just a moment to get to know Dr. Stocks better. Dr. Shawntay Stocks has over a decade of experience in service and community-based learning, coordinating service and diversity programs, and teaching. Dr. Stocks obtained her bachelor's degree in history from Guilford College, her master's degree in English and African American literature from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, and her PhD in the Language, Literacy, and Culture program at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. Her dissertation research focused on faculty diversity in higher ed. Dr. Stocks is trained in critical participatory action research, which she utilizes in planning and executing training in areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and community-based learning. Additionally, Dr. Stocks uses her poetry as a reflective tool within her workshops and trainings. So today, Dr. Stocks will be drawing from her experience as a PhD humanist, who now utilizes her training to build community partnerships and advance justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives to offer participants into some insights into the day-to-day possibilities, challenges, and rewards of a career in higher ed. So during this session, we invite all of you to please join the conversation. Feel free to drop any thoughts or questions that you have into the chat area, to use the raise hand feature to turn on your webcams or mics as you feel comfortable. This is very much an opportunity for you all to join the discussion and to have a great dialogue between us all during the hour that we have together. So with that, thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Shawntay, and I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I am a bit loquacious. I love talking about the work that I do and the work that we do with Inheritance Baltimore on Johns Hopkins campus. So I sit in the as the Assistant Director of Community Engagement and Fellowships. I am with the Inheritance Baltimore program, which I specifically sit in the Center for Africana Studies. But I wanted to give you a little bit more background about what Inheritance Baltimore is, because whenever I talk about it, people actually get excited about Inheritance Baltimore. And sometimes it's hard for some people to kind of be excited about their position. But myself, in the work that we get to do, to be creative, to advance social justice, and to work with community and community partners, it is actually quite exciting. And also on some of the more administrative tasks, a bit of a task. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can keep myself on track. All right. Okay. When I was looking at this initially, I thought, oh, puzzle, because there are so many pieces of a puzzle, but these are lots of like little people. We could think of it as a people puzzle. There are so many parts of a puzzle that goes into this position. It's very multifaceted. And I wanted to be able to really get into the nitty-gritty of it so that we could really discuss some of the skills that's associated, not just necessarily content knowledge. So in terms of Inheritance Baltimore, let me move this so you can see it. So Inheritance Baltimore is a humanities and arts education for Black liberation. And we have joint programming with both the Sheridan Libraries and also racism and immigration on RIC and citizenship. So we work to preserve, to research and to preserve Black archival resources, to create Black arts and public heritage, and also to expand local infrastructure for freedom education. If you can think about liberatory education, that's about freedom education. We also support postdoctoral fellows. We have 2 postdoctoral fellows. And we also support graduate students, undergraduate students, and faculty who are committed to documenting the history of institutional racism in the formation of the academic disciplines at and outward from Johns Hopkins University. We just had an event called Ritual of Remembrance. I don't know if any of you were able to attend on the campus, which was really an event for us to recall and honor those who were enslaved on Johns Hopkins campus. To get to know Inheritance Baltimore a little bit more. So IB is a reparations program for humanities educations and arts-based public engagement in Baltimore. We work with a lot of HBCUs, Black churches, and Black cultural organizations in Baltimore City. We believe that historical recovery and the humanities have a central role to play in the continued revitalization of Baltimore. We work with Baltimore alongside Baltimore organizations partnering equitably. We are committed to redirecting the social and institutional capital of Johns Hopkins University that has accumulated for more than a century in its defense of white intellectual and material interests in Baltimore towards a holistic investment in Black expressions of history and the arts, documenting processes of white supremacy and interlocking oppressions that afflict Black communities, and the creation and preservation of Black knowledge, and really honoring different ways of knowing. So important. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of the actual position. So when we think about the position which I currently hold, there's onboarding, coordination, facilitation, and implementation. So I oversee practice fellows. Okay, I can't see you all, so I want to see you, but I don't want it to be a bother to the screen. So I oversee the hiring and onboarding. I am like the HR person for our team. I'll get an email and they'll ask, who's the HR person? Me. Who's the recruiting person? I work with recruiting as well. So I oversee 2 practice fellows who are early career, who are really just learning that. So I work with them, and also graduate fellows. So we have teaching assistants. We also have research assistants that work with our program as well. So in terms of the onboarding, in terms of just those things that you'll need to come onto our campus, to get hired onto our campus can be pretty time consuming in our processes. And then also when you want to create a position, requisitioning positions, all of that takes quite a long process as well in terms of approval and coordinating with different departments within HR itself. I also plan cultural events for our team. So we want to make sure that our team is really connected with Baltimore. So not just researching Baltimore and also providing resources with Baltimore community partners, but also getting to know the rich cultural history, cultural programming that is there. So just reaching out to Baltimore cultural institutions to plan events for our fellows and networking. And that's a way to kind of leverage our partnerships as well, but also reinvesting in our community partners too, when we go to the events and we become patrons of different art forms in Baltimore as well. Okay, I'm moving this out of the way. That's 2 of our fellows right there. All right, working with our faculty and also our postdocs who want to teach. So working with course planning ideas, listing, evaluation, and supporting with syllabus development, which I love. Because when you can think about, so I know it probably sounds like a lot of work, which it is, but being able to think about the different resources and also Baltimore sources that we can put inside of a syllabus, considering the different courses that are already there and courses that are absent. What else can we add to a particular field, giving a different perspective or lens? But then even more recently, having to think about some of our students who want to teach, who haven't taught. And so thinking about different pedagogical models of teaching that we want to share with our graduate teaching assistants and also our postdocs. For example, community-based learning, like really wanting students to think about community-based learning, working with communities, right? Researching with communities, researching alongside communities, not researching on, and then thinking about also our historical relationship as an institution with Baltimore and having to address that and help our students think through that, our postdocs, as they're thinking about building their syllabus, how they're going to consider the framework for themselves, but also consider that in terms of working with community partners and also being like the community partners are like, no, we don't want to work with you because of this history. And, really thinking through negotiating those. So we talked about hiring undergraduate assistants in terms of the HR process, much easier. Creating orientation. Now that was definitely an interesting process because you have career professionals at different levels of their careers. And so this is a brand new program. So that's exciting when you have a brand new program because you get to create, like if there's no, okay, this is what we did for the last 5 years. There's what do we want our team to know, right? What do we want them to know about Baltimore? What do we want them to know about Johns Hopkins? What do we want them to know about working with each other? So it's definitely exciting to collaborate and put together with both my supervisor, Dr. Kalias Amin, the other two PIs, Dr. Lawrence Jackson, Dr. Stewart and Schrader, and Dr. Nathan Connolly. So being able to put together something that really made the team feel community inside the team and then feel community with the larger Baltimore community. So that was really exciting. But for some people, that could be daunting, right? You're creating something from scratch. And with this grant, Inheritance Baltimore is a $4 million grant from the Mellon Foundation. With this grant, that's where it is. This hasn't existed before. So we're building as we're going, which is a bit frightening sometimes, but also very exciting. So being flexible, being creative, thinking about aspirational goals, as well as thinking about very linear, detailed, how can we get this done as well, is an important process as you're negotiating, building while you're going. All right, let me move this. And of course, assisting the director with management of the onboarding process and the day-to-day activities of the postdoctoral fellows. So we think about it from onboarding to implementation, the coordination that goes into it, the facilitation that goes into the different processes is quite important. And no day is the same. Some days is filled with budget, as we'll get to, and reports. And other days is filled with brainstorming, researching, meetings for collaboration, which is really important. And I am very much belonging to a talkback church. So I'm going to pause as we go through the presentation to see if you have any questions or comments about what I've shared thus far. All right. I'm sorry.
A quick question, Shawntay, if you don't
Sure.
mind. And I apologize, by the way, if you hear some noise. My cat is sitting next to me and he's feeling very chatty right now. So I was just interested in this idea of kind of, building as you're kind of going here, almost like building the plane as you're flying it, as you're kind of creating programs from the ground up. And maybe you'll get into this a little bit later, but I was just wondering if you could tell us more about what that scaffolding process looks like for you and your team. Does it start with understanding your budget and working backwards from that? Is it more about conceptually ideating around the new program that you want to introduce? Is it about thinking about a need that you want to serve? We'd just kind of love to hear more about that as you're proceeding here.
Absolutely. And it is definitely ideating first, kind of creating a vision of this is the goal that we have, because in writing the grant, the PIs have to make sure that, so the grant is our blueprint. This is what we said we were going to do, but not necessarily the detailed description of how to execute. So we look at our blueprint, which is the grant, and say, okay, we want these positions, we want these programs, we want these educational opportunities, we want these partners. And so it's definitely looking at that and then thinking, okay, what's the best way to get from this is what we want to create to actually creating it? Who would be the best person to partner with it or with us for this? So we think institutional partners as well as community partners, so campus partners and Baltimore City community partners. And being that we are 3 departments within Inheritance Baltimore. So we have the Sheridan Libraries, we have Racism, Immigration, and Citizenship, and we also have the Billie Holiday Project for Liberation Arts. So we have those 3 centers. So definitely starting there, and then thinking about with the leaders on that team, okay, so how do these decisions and this opportunity impact these different communities on campus? What resources do we already have in addition to the resources that we're going to need to execute the process and really giving voice? And then calendaring. Calendaring is huge. You might not think it is, but when you have 3 different departments and you have multiple divisions, even with under those departments, really looking at not wanting to overtask one in your team, but 2, having competing events on the same day. So we have a calendar where we all share, it's called our collaborative calendar, so that we can partner better and very intentional, and so that we're not programming on top of each other. Because I don't know if you've been on campus and like, look at all these great opportunities. Wait, it's the same day, it's the same time. So really being able to spread that out across the semester, and then looking thematically as well. What do we have already? What's missing? And how does this tie into the larger goal for what we have and for what we want? And then we kind of do like a gap analysis to think about, okay, this is what's missing. So this is where we need to add, and this is where we'll lend more support. So that's some of the ways that we kind of create, which is awesome and challenging sometimes, especially when it comes to calendaring.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before I continue? And remember, you can stop me, you can raise your hand, and we'll pause right there. So I'm going to go to the next slide. All right. Those are 2 of our archivists. Okay, budgets. I would say probably not my most favorite part of the position. So thinking about creating systems for tracking the expenditure, research funds, conference travel, and project-related spending, in addition to creating the different trackers or thinking about management programs for yourself, also thinking institutionally about our different systems. Because with each thing that you want to do, there's a different aspect of a system in which you utilize within Johns Hopkins. And so really getting to know those systems as well, and understanding a learning curve, because even with a PhD, for some of these different systems, you're just like, oh my gosh, bumping my head. This does not feel intuitive. How am I going to get this report processed? I'm going to remember all of these different details to produce the report that I want. So that's something, definitely a learning curve, working with our SAP system and working with our Concourse system to produce different reports, generating monthly budget reports, and then also thinking through what works for you and then what works for your team members, because we all kind of think and we organize differently. So wanting to make sure we reach a creative solution where we all understand what we mean when we say X, and we can all track what we want in a budget to understand what's going forward, so that I'm like, oh, this Excel document, I like it this way. And someone's like, that doesn't make sense to me. So thinking even creatively and strategically about how you can share the documenting process, because that's something we want to be conscious of as well. We want to be able to report back to Mellon that this has happened, and be able to be very linear, but yet descriptive and have great narrative as well. So how can we best do that? And we've definitely found utilizing calendars, utilizing Excel documents with, different headers that talks about the event, who had the event, why did we have the event, the budget related to the event. So there is a lot of tabbing going on. So managing budgets and tracking spending related to this fellowship program, preparing reports for diverse members of the team, and then having working knowledge, as you see there, of database spreadsheet and different calendar scheduling and processing. And then 2, thinking through the difference between academic scholarly writing and then thinking about report writing, where you want to be very direct. And I'm a poet, so I have a flair for wanting to be creative, long-winded, and it's like, no, get to the point. This happened, X, Y, and Z. We don't need poetry here. We definitely need a very specific report to show the outcomes. So that is a challenge, I think, for some creative academics who write non-creative reports. All right, any questions, comments? All right. Outreach and public engagement. I'm an introvert. It may not seem that way right now, but very much an introvert. And so I've always been in a career where it's public school teaching, or whether it was teaching at different community colleges or college campuses, where it's required me to be an extrovert. It's like a switch comes on where I'm like, okay, it's time to do my extroverted part of the work. Where I get to partner with different Baltimore community organizations and HBCUs. And so definitely thinking through the best way for communication and the best way for information to get out, because even internally, sometimes messaging is hard to get through across the different parts of JHU as an institution, the different collectives that makes up who we are. So even getting information out about our events internally, and then thinking about advertising our events with community partners in the community so that we get a fair turnout. And of course, we're battling COVID, so that makes a difference. But definitely right now, utilizing community-based resources, because they reach out to their own people in their own organization. So being able to partner and utilize the resources that they use for messaging in addition to what we use internally. And then thinking through the fact that Hopkins doesn't always feel hospitable to visitors. So thinking about access, thinking about the best ways for people to feel welcome on our campus, but not always holding it here, making sure that we're in the community, showing up and having our events there as well, so that we have a both and not like this city on a hill, but city with and within Baltimore. Work with the leadership team to identify opportunities and venues for showcasing public arts and humanities programs and scholarship. That is exciting. Being able to say, we want to partner with you. When's your event happening? How can we support? And really understanding that we're coming to sit down and listen. We're not the sage on the stage. We are really coming to sit down and learn with and from different Baltimore City organizations, providing intellectual and logistic support in planning annual conferences, seminars with our partner programs, Racism, Immigration, and Citizenship, and the Billie Holiday Project for Liberation Arts, and the Sheridan Libraries. I see, is there a question in the chat? Of poetry, yes. And then developing strategies for brand messaging, online visibility. That is definitely something that we are working on, because when you don't have, like we say, an established program, you are building from scratch. So even thinking about documenting, when you think about the 3 different programs and you're having an event, so documentation of who's a part of this event so that everyone's represented. And then when we work with campus partners, you can't have 50 million logos on one flyer, because that becomes overwhelming. So how do we get the message across that this was an equal partnership between these varied organizations? And sometimes it's a matter of just listing them and hyperlinking versus putting all the visual, definitely logos on there, because ownership of programs can become, what's the word? I don't want to say contentious, but everyone that's involved in a program definitely wants to have a say and have the way that they show up and the way that they are represented and the way that it's communicated and the way that it's shared to show that they were a part of it. So even thinking about internally as well as externally, negotiating that process is important, because you want people to feel heard and represented for the work that they bring to the table, and rewarded as well when accolades come out. Questions? I'll pause. Okay. Oh, it's not advancing. Pardon me. Let me stop share and try again. There we are. So this is about collaboration. Key. Collaboration is so key, especially if you want to think about skill set too, in terms of something that you may be extremely talented at. For me, it is definitely not visual arts. So I appreciate being able to share with people on the team who are much more creative in that end. So thinking about consulting and collaboration, working with the faculty to develop and recommend courses, that is so exciting. I'm not going to say a nerd, although I view that word positively, but when it comes to thinking about how people learn and the different ways that we can learn and the different strategies and the different resources that we can utilize, like theater in the classroom, theater working with community, thinking about experiential learning inside the course too, not just experiential learning in terms of community-based learning, service learning, but using interactive methods in the classroom where you might take on a role, right? Or you might sing, or you might produce a monologue that correlates to what you were studying or what students are studying. It just makes the space that more dynamic. It's, for me, very exciting. So, and then I am teaching this semester. I'm co-teaching with Dr. Ayman a class called Arts and Social Justice. And I'm going to pause here because that's another exciting part of the role that I am really enjoying, really being able to talk with students about social justice and then take that with students into Baltimore. We're bringing in Baltimore performers, poets. We're thinking about street murals and what that means, graffiti as art, what the different communities of artists in Baltimore has to say about a particular art. So we get to share Baltimore's history in many different ways that students might not be exposed to in other classes. And so, although that's additional with, reading, research, and course prep for arts and social justice, it's exciting. So it's a different vein. And it makes the day-to-day, like I said, so different. You're never repeating the same thing over and over again. I mean, on some days you're on calls, answering with community partners, explaining who you are, why you want to show up, how this partnership will work. So you're collaborating with external people, and then you're collaborating internally. Who else do we want to get this message to? Thinking about our diverse stakeholders, right? Thinking about, this is the message. Who do we want to know this? And then how can we get that message to them? So even thinking about breaking down some of the silos and the barriers within campus so that we can then partner effectively and get our message out about who we are, because we're so new. We're only a year in. So really thinking about our messaging and context is so important, because we not only want to be celebrated within Baltimore, but we also want community and celebration and sometimes confrontation because of what we're working on, right? Working on racial justice and social justice for some people is not necessarily comfortable or easy at all. And so having tough conversations to say, this is how we engage, we're going to move forward with this, and we're going to be honest about that. Because a person asked me regarding our ritual of remembrance, why are we doing this? This seems performative. And so having to be able to explain that us honoring those who were enslaved on campus isn't performative. It's naming people who haven't been named. It's showing up, right? It's making known when absence as presence. So it's saying we were here, we mattered, and we're calling back and forth to be honest about this history. So, but I understand why people thought could think that it's performative, because if they don't understand the purpose of your intent and they're just thinking you're coming from Hopkins again, oh, Hopkins is just doing that. No. And then getting to see the people behind the project as well really makes a difference too. I'm going to pause again for questions. All right. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, Shawntay, so just as a quick reminder to folks, definitely feel free to enter any thoughts, comments, questions you have into the chat, or to use the raise hand feature anytime. But just maybe a quick question for you in thinking about just even some of the language that you're using to describe this partnership cultivation and the possibilities and challenges to go with that. I can kind of hear someone who has this advanced training in the humanities that you have. And I'm wondering if maybe you can share a little bit with us about your experience in terms of being in the weeds with your disciplinary training around language and history and literature, and how you see that playing out in maybe this side of your work, thinking about the work that you do in an educational space. And really, it's one of the things I'm hearing, and let me know if this syncs up with you as well, is just thinking about different ways to communicate to a broad audience. In doing interdisciplinary work at one time in graduate school, I remember so much of that was about overcoming disciplinary barriers or silos when they were perhaps less helpful. So do you see any relationship between those two things that you could share with us?
Absolutely. And given my background in terms of language literacy and culture at UMBC, and coming from an interdisciplinary background, what's interesting is that one of my mentors, because my major in undergrad was history, then I switched to English and African American literature for my master's. when I was thinking about, because when I first started, I wanted to be a professor, but it was actually the research journey, my dissertation, and the findings of my dissertation that made me realize I don't want to be a full-time professor. I do want to teach, but I definitely enjoy program administration. And so because there's so many ways to teach. Teaching doesn't just happen in the classroom, right? And so there's so many ways to learn. And so I can definitely do workshops. I could definitely, in terms of professional development with our team, that's another opportunity, like especially young career professionals, helping them think through, okay, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. So, that career planning aspect of it, which I didn't even really highlight, but like just helping people think through their professional, like you have professional development funds. Where do you want to go? What do you want to learn? And then having them be able to look, well, I have a history degree, but I'd really like to learn about this. All right, let's see what JHU offers, but also let's see what's out in terms of conferences. But my mentor told me, she was like, okay, if you want to become a professor, you need to get one specific degree. She was like, you love history, get a PhD in history. If not history, get a PhD in English. And I was like, well, what if I love history, English, arts, and and but for me, what if I love all of this? She was like, she's very old school. She was like, no, you need a PhD in a specific field. I didn't listen, obviously, because I wanted a way. I wanted to break those disciplinary boundaries because of my own personal interest, which brings me joy in terms of my career. Being able to plan workshops where people interact. And so we have theater, or being able to plan a poetry seminar or a poetry performance, a slam performance in the name of whatever theme that we have. Being able to go to a drumming where we're bringing in the history of the drums, where we're bringing in the history of what drumming means to this particular community. So you have art, you have history, right? And then you also educate about potential community conflicts that could have happened, did happen. And so there's education, there's history, there's art. So people get to see, to feel, and that was part of the ritual remembrance. People got to see, people got to feel, and then we had drummers and dancing. So we didn't just have history, we had art in drumming, we had art in dancing, we had poetry. And so that was so important for us to be able to collaborate across disciplines. And we're going to continue to do that. And when we think about some of our very artifact-based learning too, being able to have things that are tactile to say, this was here, this is what this means, and then understanding what that means throughout Baltimore as well. So on our team, we have sociologists, we have anthropologists, we have performing artists, I said sociologists, we have English professors. So it's definitely a wide variety. I would say in terms of the hard scientists, that is not what we have. But in terms of the humanities, we run the gamut in terms of disciplines and skill sets within the arts. I feel like I ran on, but did I answer your question?
No, very much so. Thank you. And just really
Okay.
appreciate the image you provided around this, I think, expansive approach to doing the work of the humanities from all these different angles. Very helpful.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it come alive. Being able to look at, like, okay, we have this dramatic monologue, but let's contextualize it. Then, okay, if we really want people to know this fact, right? Because we have fact, and then even problematizing the idea of facts, right? Where did this fact come from? How did it originate as a fact? What made it a fact? Who authored it as fact? And sometimes we have to think about that. Definitely, not sometimes, often in our work. Where did this idea come from? How did we learn about this idea? And thinking about quote unquote ownership of ideas and different things like that too, working with the community, because community voice may say X, Y, and Z, history may say X, Y, and Z. And we've often found that community has been right sometimes, whereas, scholars have had to back up and say, okay, so sorry, we learned. And we learned that through, especially one of the work we did with Lumbee community artist, her name's Dr. Ashley Minner, and she was saying in her work how the city had said, this is where the Lumbee community was in Baltimore, here is the map. And she went back to the community of elders and she was sharing with them, here's the map of our community that the city said. And they're like, no, that didn't exist there. That didn't exist here. Let's correct this. So being able to have liaisons that, know how to work the inner workings of institutional structures, but also work with community to correct some of the things that we think that we got right. So it's pretty exciting. So interdisciplinary scholarship, that is one of the exciting things in terms of being able to Think about the history background, think about the English background, think about performative aspects of what we're doing. That has been extremely exciting, and being able to keep in with that. Thinking about that in terms of how we do workshops and trainings too, thinking about the different ways of learning, thinking about ourselves as learners, thinking about what we want to convey, and also confronting any myths or stereotypes and working with the different communities of Baltimore, because Baltimore has gotten a bad rap nationally. And so people don't think that there's sometimes this awesome, creative, cultural, dynamic, knowledgeable, place that Baltimore is. So making sure that we share that through our different disciplines and our workshops internally, and working with community leaders who lead the workshop. And so that's another part of it too, making sure that our community partners are leaders in the work that we're doing with community. And it's not just coming from Hopkins, that it's very much community led, community driven. So that is important.